Just got to connect all this stuff. Come on. All right, great. I'm Adam DeRito, and welcome back to the Tuxes and Tomahawks podcast. I'm here with Sergeant First Class Chris Fronk, and him and I have an interesting history, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But thanks for coming on the show, Chris. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, man.
So let's just talk about your early Army career before we talk into all the other stuff. So when did you join the Army, and what inspired you to serve in the military?
So I didn't do so hot in high school. So my mom and dad said they're not going to pay for college because they knew I'd party and flunk out type of thing. So it was basically, the military was a good option to get the college fund, grow up a little bit, and, have a full-time job for 4 years. So the plan was join for 4 years, get out, come home, become an electrician.
Yep.
Well, I joined in January of 1989 and shipped out
2 years after I was born.
Yeah, I'm a little old. But shipped out I enlisted on the delayed entry program, so any military members who were active duty should understand what that means. Basically, you enlist in high school and then you commit to leaving for boot camp after you graduate. So I decided, hey, I want to enjoy my last summer at home before I go to basic training. So I shipped out at the end of August, and I did basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and graduated that in, I sent you the dates, but I can't remember. I think it was November of 89. And then did AIT, Advanced Individual Training, where you learn your job skill at Fort Gordon, Georgia, and graduated that in March of 1990 and became the technical official term was Mobile Subscriber Equipment Transmission Systems Operator. So
what the hell is that in the Army? I don't even know if they have that MOS anymore.
They don't. But the thing is, when I enlisted, it was brand new, so nobody knew what the heck it was. Right. So they just read it to me out of the TM or the FM, whatever it was in. And I was like, oh, that sounds good, because I wanted to be in an electrical field. Well, I was working with electronics, not on electronics. So it wasn't quite what I wanted, but it was a good job and I enjoyed it. But basically, I was a radio operator. If you look at the civilian world, well, nowadays with cell phones, it's like you pick up your cell phone, it transmits a radio signal to an antenna. From that antenna, it goes through a system to a switchboard, and then it's routed to wherever the call is going. We basically had a tactical version of that. So all of our transmission lines between switchboards were over the air. So we had antennas for that. And then we had a radio access unit, which was, we of course, we use an acronym for everything in the military. So it was a ROW. And the ROW had 8 radios in it, and it would connect to phones in Humvees that were driving around. So we could handle up to 8 calls at a time, and then they would route through the system. So
interesting. So you joined right at basically when the Gulf War was going on, and then Somalia happened, and then you went over to Europe into the Bosnia-Herzegovina incident. So talk to a lot about that, because that's actually really applicable to kind of what's going on now, like a lot of those Eastern Bloc countries. So what were your experiences when you got into Europe, from all your experience previous to that, and all your PCS moves between there?
Yeah, we went. Well, first duty was Fort Carson. Then I did a permanent change of station to Germany in 1995. I think it was the end of 94. Or was it? No, it was 95. So 96 was when I was over there, right? I sent you my thing, and I don't remember dates anymore. But we were supposed to deploy in December of 95, but the Sava River flooded. And the only way into Bosnia was over a floating bridge. And so they postponed our deployment back because troops just couldn't get into Bosnia. So they were sitting there in Croatia, basically in the mud, waiting to get across. But basically, we just went in to break up a civil war is what was going on. You had the Serbs and you had the Catholics and the Protestants. And so the Serbs, I believe, are Muslim. So it's the same old stuff that we've been dealing with for, eons, different religions fighting each other. And we went in to break it up. They brokered a peace deal. I was doing communications, so I didn't really get in the front lines of anything. But there were still people getting shots taken at them and snipers. And we were collecting up their tanks and their all their weaponry, basically, so that they couldn't fight each other. And I spent basically a full year there. We came home in December. Like I said, we were supposed to deploy in December, but it got pushed back to January. So I got to at least be home for Christmas both years. But
yeah, and that was an interesting time because it was the only time that they were ever able to shoot down an F-117 stealth fighter was during the Bosnia-Herzegovina incident. And I know Scott O'Grady, who is one of my childhood heroes, he got shot down in an F-16. Actually, I think Goldfein got shot down over there as well. So it was an interesting conflict that a lot of Americans forget about. And I know that Owen Wilson Behind Enemy Lines is like loosely based upon what happened over there. But it's kind of interesting because it's the one time that Americans were actually confronting, actual trained Russian, forces basically from the Serbian side doing anti-air and in a modern war post Gulf War. And it's amazing how many Americans forget about that incident.
Yeah. And then while I was there, you had the infamous Hillary Clinton quote now that she landed in Tuzla, Bosnia under sniper fire. Well, guess what? I was there, so I know that that's not true. It has since been proven to not be true. But yeah, I
always tell guys oh, we want to go fight in Ukraine. I'm like, no, you don't. You don't want to fight a bunch of angry white Serbian dudes, like in Russian descent dudes who know jujitsu because they actually know how to fight. They actually have similar equipment to us. It's not as good as our stuff, but yeah, it was definitely an intense conflict. Definitely a lot of air to ground stuff. We definitely changed our motives for special operations, doctrine during that time, even leading into 9/11. So it was definitely more or less we were training for a conventional war against the Russians, and you trying to stop the genocide of what was going on with the Muslims over there. But I think American doctrine changed significantly, and you could talk about that because you got out right before 9/11 and then came back in right before it as well, right?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say one other thing about Bosnia real quick.
Sure.
It was a NATO mission, so I got to serve side by side with other nations. So I saw Swedes and Norwegians, and the Russians were even there. So I remember driving on to Tuzla because I was my platoon sergeant's driver. So also Bosnia, huge landmine country. So
yes,
landmines
you're right.
everywhere.
So I remember even Princess Diana went over there in the late 90s and she was doing anti-landmine campaigns and stuff too, because a lot of kids are getting their legs blown off from that conflict. And it's still a huge issue even today.
Yeah. So, I mean, we had sandbags in the floorboards of the Humvees, and my platoon sergeant, he was like, do not get on the shoulder of that road. Well, you have 18 wheelers coming right at you, and the roads in Europe are much more narrow than they are here. So,
this is before they even armored up Humvees and stuff too. This is the bare bone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mariah Carey, early 90s.
Yeah, you had no armor, no armor back then. So
you got the cloth
Humvee.
doors on them still.
Yeah, I mean, we used to drain them after we cleaned them up. We'd poke holes in them with ground rods, just slamming it through the bottom of the floorboard. So that'll tell you how sturdy they were. But anyway, I just wanted to point out that we had other nations there with us, and that was cool to experience. To be there, and Swedes can speak English, Germans or Russians not so much. So it was interesting.
It's definitely a good experience, even on the EURCOM training rotations that a lot of units are doing now. It's really good to integrate with NATO partners and understand how other guys' equipment works, what their tactics are, how to integrate that into our philosophy. And I think it's definitely underrated. I know a lot of guys who deployed from Carson, they go train with the Estonians all the time, and they always complain about how, if we ever got into an actual ground war with Russia, we're the only force that could actually counter all their anti-tank movements and stuff, because these guys are just they're just not as well trained as American, tank crews and armored crews.
And even during my time at Fort Carson and Fort Hood, we would go to the National Training Center out in Fort Irwin, California, and they actually had Humvees and tanks and everything that were mocked up to look like Russian vehicles. So when you did your war games out there, that's what it was. It was America versus Russia. And then that kind of changed, especially after Desert Storm. But we started painting our vehicles tan instead of green, camouflage and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, after Germany, I went to Fort Hood for a couple of years, like Korea. Then I came back to Fort Carson and decided I was done. Basically, the Army turned me off by saying that they were all about family and then proving to be otherwise. So
and that still goes today. So
yeah. So that was the reason I left the military. I got out in March of 01. Shortly, at like a week or two after I ETSed, my wife at the time filed for divorce. So then I was kind of rolling solo and living with a couple guys up in Aurora, working in Denver on cell phones. And they happened to be two brothers that were in the Colorado Army National Guard. I missed the camaraderie. I mean, we had it between the three of us, but it's just something you don't experience outside of the military.
Right. And
so I missed that. And so I joined the Guard in July of 01. My first drill with the National Guard was in Denver right after 9/11. So we were like at the.
What was that time like for you? I mean, like you got out, then you come back in. It's like, oh shit, like things just really changed.
Well, you should appreciate this. I actually, after I got laid off from work, working for Cricket in 2002, I tried to join the Air Force, but they didn't want me.
Oh, we'll get to that.
Yeah. So anyway, it was crazy because we were. Have you been to the Denver Armory there on Franklin Street?
Oh yeah, many a times. Many a times.
So there's a bike path that runs right along the river there that runs right next to the armory. So basically, I had no equipment because I hadn't been assigned any yet. I'm borrowing a Kevlar helmet, flak vest, all this stuff.
Sounds like the Guard.
From another soldier, and we're out there blocking the bike path, checking everybody that's coming through. I mean, it was a heightened alert day. I mean, I still remember 9/11. Unbelievable. Like a lot of people got the day off of work. They made us work, but we were working on the cell phone towers and we were just in shock and like went and parked close to each other and talked to other technicians, and just about all the stuff that was going on. So anyway, and I started drilling in September of 01 and my headquarters for my unit was in Denver, but they assigned me to a detachment up in Sterling. So I started doing my weekend drills up at Sterling in like December. So you'll appreciate this. They didn't inform me when drills were after that initial drill.
That sounds exactly like the National Guard.
And so I missed a couple. So I had to make up some dates. But once I got established, I was good to go. But actually, good thing that I got stationed in Sterling because I met my wife there. So on a drill weekend, we went to the bar and she happened to be there with her cousin one night. And we headed off and, we're friends for a few months and then decided to start dating. So it was pretty cool. But then the unit up in Sterling was pretty good, but it was equipment I hadn't used before. So my MOS, I was in that mobile subscriber equipment or MSE stuff. So we had like civilian people that would come and work on it if need be. And they were all from MSE, which was a civilian company. And they manufactured all the equipment. So I knew MSE really well. In Korea, I was in Tropo. I don't know if you know what Tropo is, but Tropo is like predecessor to satellite, bounces signals off the troposphere from one dish to another. And so I learned that in Korea. But the Guard had older stuff, so they didn't have MSE. They had the stuff that was prior to that, and they had combined our MOSs because That's what the Army does when stuff gets outdated. So 31 Mike and 31 Delta became 31 Romeo. And so I was expected to know how to work on this equipment, but I was never taught it.
Right.
So anyway, being in the Guard, you don't use the equipment all that often anyway. So I think I only went to the field like once or twice with it. After 9/11, they actually had the National Guard guard in the airports. So we did security at the airports.
Yep.
I did not get selected to that. So my annual training in 2002, I actually went to JROTC, which was in Fort Polk, Louisiana, with the Special Forces guys.
Mm-hmm.
And they got deployed to Afghanistan shortly after that, and they wanted me to go, but I was getting married, so I turned them down. But and that would have been a whole nother type of signal communications. So, but I did learn a lot when I went to the 2 weeks with them. So
yeah.
But then things kind of calmed down, and then I got married and started working in a call center, troubleshooting DSL, and going to college to become an X-ray technician. And a couple years later, in February of 04, was it 04 or 05? I can't remember. It was 04, right?
Yeah. Yep. That's when you said you went overseas to.
Yeah, I didn't print it out for me. I sent it to you,
Don't worry about it. I know your history. I did your background check. It's fine. I get till now, right? So.
Yeah, so February of 04, I get told, oh, you're going to go to Kuwait, you're going to go deploy with the 143rd Signal Company out of Grand Junction. And the whole reason was they didn't have enough people on the books, so they couldn't leave country and take leave, like a mid-tour.
Mm-hmm.
So they had like 8 of us, I think, that were like follow-on afterthoughts. So we did all of our processing by ourselves. Went down to Fort Carson, did the 2-week thing or whatever to process from a reserve component to active duty. And then before you know it, here we are in Kuwait. We did have elements in Iraq, but I was in Kuwait and we were heavy tropo. So we were shooting into Iraq from Kuwait. And,
yep.
Same type of stuff with the network and all that.
Yeah, but you're still responsible for all those critical communications, and that's kind of like the main base out there is Kuwait for supply and bringing guys in and sending guys out. So I mean, you definitely had a super important mission in OIF out there that I think people don't understand. Like, comms is everything. If you don't have comms, you don't have shit. And that's one thing. Like, trying to program a SINGARs and everything else is a huge pain in the ass, but that's one thing that the U.S. military does very well is comms. And, we have multiple different avenues of doing that. And you were a tip of the spear when it came to that stuff.
Yeah. And they actually installed like a civilian network over there, I think.
Yep.
So halfway
they started
through
building that infrastructure.
Yeah. Halfway through, we sent all of our equipment home, and then we were guard duty the rest of the time. So providing force security, bus guard, all that stuff. Cause you had people coming in and going out all the time. And so you had to have somebody with a loaded weapon on the bus to protect them in case something happened. So even in Kuwait, I mean, we had the threat of terrorist things happening to us.
Oh, it was even when I was over there, there was elements out there that we had to be aware of, and even like there was minor Iranian aligned militant groups that were hiding in civilian vehicles, like stealing shit at those different ports at the crossings and stuff all the time. Like, I think we lost $25 million worth of drone cameras that no one knows where they went. And it's like, we because somebody got paid Jamal, at the crossing, and then that stuff disappeared overnight, and like no one talked about it. Right. So,
Yep. So we did that, and I was there I got there 2 weeks later than everybody. So they did the 1 year, and I was like 2 weeks short of it, but I got a full tour credit. So
hell yeah.
So we did that, and then I got back, and I was going to go back to school to finish my X-ray tech stuff. And then I got notified. I don't even remember how it came about, but I got notified that they were looking for a recruiter for Sterling, Colorado. Well, guess what? I lived in Sterling, and I was a staff sergeant. And so I applied for the job, did my interview, got hired, and then went to school and became a recruiter. And I stayed in that realm for the rest of my career. So From 2005 to 2016, I was in recruiting and retention battalion.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's kind of funny. That's kind of where we met. So you go from Gulf War to Bosnia to Iraq, and you come back. And for anyone who knows my background story, I got completely shafted by the Air Force Academy, and it's kind of funny because I brought you up on other podcasts in years past about this because no one believes how this happened. So it was funny. So I was trying to get back on active duty because the Air Force Academy put $260,000 of debt on my credit report, saying that I owed all this money back from finishing my 4 years at the academy, but they wouldn't let me serve my 5 years active duty. So they put me on as an RE4 code, basically saying I was a criminal and I couldn't do anything, even though I've never committed a crime in my life. And so it was kind of funny. I went to all the active duty guys. I went to active duty Army and Navy and Marine Corps, even Coast Guard. They're like, dude, your stuff is signed by the Secretary of the Air Force. Who the hell did you piss off? They're like, we're not touching this DD-214. Like, there's no way in hell. So as a last resort, and I always give the guard shit, but I remember I walked into that office. You guys were in Thornton at the time, right?
Yeah, Washington.
Yeah. So I walk into Thornton. I never forget, like, Sergeant Tyler, who Dallas Tyler, ironically, I just deployed with him. Like that.
Oh, wow.
So, like, full circle, right? So I walk in there, and this guy's like, who the hell is this oil field kid? He looks at my DD-214. He goes, what the hell did you do? He like pulls up my red report. I'm still listed as a second lieutenant. And he's like, I have no idea what to do with this. And he's like, I don't even know if we can get you back in. Like, there's a whole bunch of paperwork. And this is what the story I always tell is you were sitting in the back corner and I was asking about how I can commission and be an officer again. He's like, well, hold on a second. You might have to go through some loops and go through the enlisted side first. But I remember you pulled out this book off the shelf and you like, I always tell the story it's like a crusty old dusty book and you flip it open. And it was like, well, there's actually a provision with the Guard that since the governor is the commander-in-chief of the National Guard, you technically don't need a waiver over your federal DD-214. Let me make some phone calls. And, like, you called Hickenlooper's office, and then you got some clearance to, like, hey, we can push this through. We can do it. And I was, like, super excited. And then I was like, all right, well, the conditions are you have to go back through basic training. Mm-hmm. The highest rank we could put you is as an E4. And on top of that, you have to go into the specialized unit at 519, and you have one or two choices for MOS. You can either be a generator mechanic or a parachute rigger. That's your only option. And I was like, all right, I guess I'm just going to suck this dick. And then I signed up as a rigger and went back in. And then, like, we were even super nervous about getting us into MEPS. Like, I remember you were like text messaging, like, hey man, just play it cool. Just try to make it through, man. Like, you're going to be fine. And made it through, go through basic training. I remember I texted you guys, like, I finally got back in. Putting on the uniform was such a great experience for me. I did 9.5 years, in 519 before I switched to the reserve here after deployment into Intel. But personally, I just wanted to thank you for that because you changed my life. Like, if it wasn't for you and Sergeant Tyler at the time, I never would have been able to get back in and fight the academy, even start this podcast and do everything the way it's been done. So I just want to say thank you personally on this podcast for everything you've done in my life because it's made a huge difference. So,
hey man, you're welcome. I mean, it was an enlistment. That's all we were looking at.
It's like, hey, we got to get our credit here. But like getting me in was huge because like so many people were unable to do it, and you were the only office that was willing to work with me and stick through the bullshit. So,
I'm meticulous, so I may not be the fastest guy in the world, but I always sort through all the details. And, when I figured out we were able to get you in, we made it happen. So,
yeah. So, I mean, like I said, I deployed with Tyler. I came back and then you reached out to me again and you wanted to come on this podcast. So, like, tell me about what you're doing now. Let's talk about all the modern stuff you've been doing and all the other headlines we wanted to talk about today.
Well, the one thing I did was when I retired, I didn't know what to do. I mean, I had a 2-year degree in accounting, but I didn't like accounting in college. So I'm like, I'm never going to use it. So I had an opportunity to go build wind turbines. So I had a camper, and you live out of your camper on the road, and you go from site to site, living there for, 3-4 months at a clip until the site's built. And I did that from April of 16 until November. Mm-hmm. I officially retired June 30th of 16. So I was double dipping in pay there for a little bit, but I was on terminal leave and all that. So was basically retired, but still getting a check. But that's another perk to the whole military thing.
Yeah.
But I got tired of living away from home. I spent time in Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Kansas. And I would come home, but there was no paid time off or nothing like that. So if I left, I was not getting paid. So I found a job working on live wind turbines in Peets, Colorado, up on the Nebraska border in November of 16. And I worked there for 2 years. And then again, I was living away from home because with it being power generation, you had to be within an hour for recall in case of an outage. So
right.
Brighton is 2 hours from Peets. So I couldn't live at home. I had to rent a house up there or live in my camper. I did both. Rented a house for like the last 6 months or a year or whatever. But anyway, did that and then quit that and came home and got a job at Brothers Plumbing, Heating, Electric. I was an electrical apprentice, but they start you out in the warehouse as basically a runner, running parts out to guys on jobs. So I did that for a little bit, and then I actually got out in the field doing the electrical work, which was my goal. Like I told you, back in high school, I took an electronics class. So all this time I've wanted to be an electrician. But, you know, I was in my late 40s, early 50s. I think I was still in my 40s, but late 40s, and I'm the grunt, you know. I'm the low man on the totem pole, running wire through crawl spaces and stuff like that. So I decided, you know, I'd rather have a office gig doing with set hours. So opportunity arose that I could use my accounting degree, and I still had to go through the whole interview process to change jobs within the company, but I ended up doing it twice. I went into accounting and I was there for like 2.5 years. And then they created a position, inventory control specialist. So I was doing all the ordering and of parts for the whole company and everything, and making sure inventory was right and stuff like that, because they had items on consignment from different vendors. So they were stored in our warehouse but belonged to them, and then we bought them when we used them, type of thing. So I did that for about a year, and then decided, you know what, my wife had a stroke. I don't know. I'm sure you don't know that, but she was like, I don't even know. She might have been 50. She had a stroke. It wasn't severe, but she is still, you know, still has some numbness and stuff like that from it. So
yeah,
I decided life wasn't worth the rigmarole of working for $25 an hour, and I really felt like I wasn't being utilized properly. Like I had so much more to offer than what I was allowed to do, and I bet a lot of military people feel that in the civilian world, just because we're so diverse. But my wife and I love to travel, so we decided that I would quit working and live on my pension, and she works 3 days a week, and so we have 4-day weekends every weekend together, and we travel together, and I watch my granddaughter, which is awesome. But in all honesty, I'm actually back in the job market right now. I just started kind of looking, but I don't want to do anything. Like I'm trying to find basically part-time, 3 days a week type of thing, so that we can still enjoy our time together. But
yeah, no, for sure.
So that's my life story, I guess you could say.
No, it's good. So let's talk about like the financial stuff you wanted to bring up, and talking about what's going on in government policy today and politics. I know you did a couple background research things and some topics you wanted to bring up.
Yeah. So the first thing is, I don't understand, and I wrote my congressman about this, and you know, I get the standardized, oh yeah, we got your letter, and yeah, we'll look into it type of stuff. I was under Congressman Crow back then when I wrote it. Right now, Caravea is my rep.
Yeah, she's mine too. She's pretty useless. So
yeah, hopefully it'll be Evans soon. But I did not write Caravea about it. But anyway, I'm living on my pension. When I was active duty, I had a thrift savings plan, which is like your 401k for the military. Now, they don't match anything or anything like that, but It's your savings plan that they let you do pre-tax or post-tax. So I had money in my TSP, and I wanted to continue to contribute to it. But because I'm no longer a government employee, they don't permit me to do so, which I think is stupid, because I am receiving money from the federal government in a pension. So I think I should be able to invest that in my thrift savings plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not the case. Hopefully somebody will listen and take this up in Congress or something, because laws would have to be changed for it to change.
Hey man, that's what we do. Maybe we can work on legislation on that in the future. So
that would be awesome. So basically I looked up some stuff and about the entitlement, or how the eligibility and all that. So you definitely have to be an employee in order to contribute. So that's a source of frustration, is I cannot contribute to my retirement account that I established when I was in the military. And because it's government, there's a lot of paperwork in order to convert it. So I could convert it into a civilian account and then contribute to that. But here again, I have a problem. So because I'm living on a pension, the government does not consider it income, but yet they tax it like it's income. So
I never understood that. Like, that needs to go away. I know Trump was talking about not taxing Social Security anymore for, retired people and stuff like that. So why are we taxing retirement accounts, especially the post-tax stuff that we've already contributed to, our TSP or 401ks or everything else? Like, it makes absolutely no sense to me. We're just getting taxed upon tax upon tax.
Yep. And I mean, it's a pension, so it's like I earned it, but I didn't contribute to it, I guess you could say. But But still, I mean, is it income or is it not? If it's income, I should be able to invest it. If it's not income, I shouldn't be taxed on it. So right now, the government's playing both sides, and it ticks me off. But and how many retirees of the military or the government fall into this boat? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of people that retired from the military that are collecting a pension, and now they're paying taxes on that pension, and unless they hold another job, they can't invest in any kind of retirement account. And I think that's sad.
Yeah, that makes absolutely no sense. And they say, oh, the government's going to take care of you and we're going to do Social Security. But I mean, that stuff's going to be bankrupt, but especially by the time I need to use it. I'm basically funding everyone else's Social Security at this point. There's going to be nothing left for me by the time I get to there. And I've been paying into it for well over 17 years now. So,
yeah. And that's another thing. I don't pay into it anymore. So I'm like losing out on that a little bit.
Right.
Because pension, they're not going to pull that from it. And I understand that. That makes sense. But if I go back to work, I'll start contributing again. But speaking of Social Security, I believe President Trump actually said he's not going to tax anybody. I believe it was over 65 that was collecting Social Security. That was one of the things he was going to do. And I think that's great. I mean, you paid taxes your whole life. You paid into this Social Security basically as a tax your whole life. And then they take money out of it for taxes when you receive it, which is kind of stupid.
That makes absolutely no sense. I'm glad. I hope that policy gets enacted if he gets elected, because I mean, the fact you're basically getting triple taxed on your Social Security, even to withdraw that own benefit. So,
and I think I made a comment on social media about that with Social Security in general. I mean, only a moron would want the government to control your retirement account, because
the government's terrible with money. We're in trillions and trillions of dollars worth of debt. I don't trust the government with a penny, never mind my own retirement. So
yeah, they can't balance a budget from year to year, but they're going to take care of you in retirement. Come on now. We all know better. So that's what I had about the taxes. Now, Social Security, I actually did a report on this in college. So I'll just run through these notes real quick, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, sure. Go ahead.
So it was enacted by FDR in August of 1935. So before 1935, there was no Social Security, was no government-supported pension fund, or whatever you want to call it. The first person that drew a retirement check happened on January 31st, 1940, and her name was Ida Mae Fuller of Ludlow, Vermont. She drew $22.54. Now, in 1940, that might have been a decent amount of money because I have a chart here where her earnings were like in 1937, $450, and she paid $450, so it's 10% or 1%, I guess. So, and I don't know if that, it doesn't say, it just says payroll contributions, but in total, she contributed $24.75 over her working lifetime to Social Security. Ida worked for 3 years under the system, and her initial monthly check was $22.54. Now, she had only contributed $24.75 in 3 years, and in a month, she got almost all of it back.
Yeah.
During her lifetime, now she lived to be an old lady, and good for her, she collected a total of $22,888.92 in Social Security benefits. That's like a 92,000% return on investment.
Yeah, that definitely doesn't happen today.
So it just doesn't. It was never solvent. It was flawed from the get-go.
Yeah.
So, if you can collect more than you put in, then that's wrong. You're collecting from somebody else.
Right.
And the way Social Security works is you're basically they're paying the current recipients out of the current people that are paying it.
Yes.
So it's never going to work. I mean, I know that they say it's gonna be bankrupt every 4 years. You hear about it, but it just needs to be changed. And I think Trump had some ideas on it, about people that don't need it, don't collect it. Well, if you pay in, you should get it, but you should only get what you paid in. You shouldn't get more than that. So if you only paid in $24.75,
well, entitlement, and I don't think most people understand.
You should get out.
Yeah, entitlements make up most of the U.S. government's budget. It's actually not the Department of Defense or anything else, which it's like I think about 20%, and even that's trillions of dollars, right? But yeah, entitlements definitely needs to be reformed in this country. It's definitely being misused, and people are taking advantage of it. And there's so many different and better ways to do it.
Yeah, and I hate calling it an entitlement because you did contribute to it.
Yes.
But at the same time, if you're drawing more out of it than you put into it, that's when I believe it becomes an entitlement, I guess. But I mean, my in-laws live on Social Security and had no retirement accounts or nothing. And my father-in-law is 75, and he keeps going back to work because he can't live on it.
Right.
Because things have just gotten so damn expensive.
Yep.
With inflation and all that. We're hurting. I don't want to take it away from people that need it, type of thing, but
sure.
At the same time, it definitely needs reformed. And when George W. Bush was in the White House, he tried to privatize it. I don't know what that consisted of, but he was completely shot down and ostracized for it. It's I'd rather you not take that money out and then let me put it in my 401k personally. But
that's exactly what I'd like to do. I mean, I get a much better return on my 401k, the company I work for, than the government's going to give me. So
right. And we know they're not responsible with money and all that fun stuff. So that's they always talk about how the biggest threat facing the United States, if you're on the left, it's climate change, evidently. But my thing is the fiscal stuff. That I believe the national debt is the biggest issue we face.
Oh, we are indebted to our adversaries at this point. The trillions and billions of dollars that we borrow from China and all these other countries. Is that you're correct. It's a massive risk to national security.
Yep. So that's all I got on that stuff. And then I wanted to talk about home distilling now.
Yeah. One of my favorite pastimes.
I can't talk about that because it's illegal in the state.
Didn't they just change the law in Colorado? I thought they just changed it where you're now allowed to make a gallon or two a year or something of racing fuel, as we like to say.
I hadn't seen that.
Yeah, so I heard that. I think there was some federal law passed in Tennessee or something like that in the district court, and now they're approving home distilling and you don't have to classify it as racing fuel as long as for personal use only. I'd have to fact check myself on that, but I know some of the laws have recently changed on that. So
basically, on July 10th of this year, a federal court declared that the federal ban on at-home distilling was unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
Now, having said that, this decision, I'm quoting an article from CEI.org. I don't know who they are, but this decision does not affect the regulatory powers of state governments, it says. So the state powers to regulate health and safety measures and thus regulate home distilling are untouched by this decision.
Well, actually, I think that's what the Chevron doctrine is actually so important that it got overturned, is because now individual agencies cannot make their own laws internally, and it has to go through a court to be adjudicated. So this actually might change that for that law in the to the American citizen, is because by overturning Chevron, now these individual regulatory agencies within states and the federal government can't override what was proven out in court, and if they want to, it actually has to go through a judge now. So,
and I think that's why this happened. It's because of that Chevron decision, because it was a home distilling group of people that had I don't have the name of the organization that filed the lawsuit, but basically the federal court decided that the ban on home distilling exceeds the scope of the federal government's limited powers. The Constitution's tax power does not allow the federal government to ban home distilling, because that's where they go on home distilling, is the taxes.
Right.
Because that's a big thing. They collect taxes on all this alcohol, and that's where they always go in court. And this judge decided that the tax power does not give them the authority to ban it. Largely because the ban does not add money into the federal treasury or protect federal tax revenue. And then the Constitution's power to regulate interstate commerce does not allow federal government to ban home distilling, largely because the ban neither regulates interstate commerce directly nor is related to any larger regulatory scheme. So those are the bullet points of what the judge decided. But like I said, it also said that state governments still have the authority on a safety and health matters to regulate it. And I think so. A big reason why this whole home distilling ban happened was back in the 30s during Prohibition.
Yep.
They had the bathtub gin. Well, they used turpentine to dilute it to make more money. Well, nobody uses turpentine anymore. You just dilute it.
Yeah, we have
with water.
self-respect now. We don't have to try to kill each other.
Right. So we're not selling it. Yeah, some people do, but
yeah.
I love the show Moonshiners. So that's what got me into the whole thing. But I know that on the show, they were trying to get the law changed in.
Yeah, that's why we need
Virginia.
to abolish the ATF. It's completely unnecessary.
And West Virginia recently passed a Home Distilling Act to allow home distilling. I believe Missouri has permits home distilling. But if Colorado does, they'd be one of the few. But I haven't seen that. But
yeah,
they have a Mile High distilling, or a Mile High. I can't remember the name of the company, but there's a company in Denver that makes stills and sells them on the internet.
Yeah, I know one of them is in Fort Collins. It's called Clawhammer Supply. That's where I get most of my stuff. So
yeah, and then there's a Mile High one that's in I want to say Westminster or somewhere. And then there's the North Georgia Still Company, which is where I got my stuff, but I just use it for water.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to purify that water and make my racing fuel for the rocket ship I don't have. So
I do actually. I did purify water because I have a CPAP machine, and you're supposed to use distilled water in it. So instead of paying $1 a gallon, which I know is not much, but it's easier to throw some tap water in a still and distill it, and then you have distilled water. Boom.
There you go.
Good to go. So, so I'm hoping that changes, because you can brew your own beer. You can make your own wine. Why the hell can't you make your own hard liquor?
Exactly. Yeah, it makes zero sense. I mean, it's one of my favorite pastimes that I 100% do not participate in. So.
Right. I know exactly what you mean. kind of like all my guns went down on a boat.
I lost them in a tragic boating accident, especially during
Yeah.
that bump stock ban. It was horrible. Like it's all
Yeah.
gone now, somewhere in like, you know, Chatfield Reservoir somewhere. So
You know what's funny about that? My boat, I bought a boat last summer and it actually sank in Cherry Creek.
yeah, and all your bump stocks went with it, so it's fine.
Yeah, it did. I had all my guns on board too, so yeah. And they weren't there when I recovered the boat.
Nope.
But the last thing I had was Tim Walz's military stuff. But
yeah, why don't you break that down from us from your perspective as a guy who served a significant amount of time as well? Because I think, you know, a lot of it gets misinterpreted, but you know, this is probably a good topic of discussion for today.
Yeah, because I mean, the biggest thing to me is I watched an interview or read an article that was an interview with one of his, I guess the guy that took over Sergeant Major duties for him. Because they were supposed to deploy, and then he drops his retirement paperwork so that he doesn't have to deploy, and he ran for Congress. I'm like, well, you just abandon your troops. That's turning your back on your soldiers is about the worst thing you could do in the military.
Especially when you work to get that high as a master sergeant, you know, and then trying to make E9, you know, taking a command sergeant major position. So yeah, it does take a lot of time to get to those positions, and you are responsible for a lot of things. But yeah.
Yeah, and he retired prior to 9/11, so he already had 20 years of service.
Mm-hmm.
And then after 9/11, he re-enlisted in the National Guard. Now, I don't know what his service was prior to 9/11, but it sounds like it was still reserve.
Yeah, apparently he was with some arty unit in Italy for like a training rotation, and that's like the extent of what he got. And guy got like 2 commendation medals and something like that. And it's like, well, I know more E2s who have more than ribbons and decorations than that, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I look like a Venezuelan general if I put my uniform on.
Yeah, I know, right?
Stacks, you know, but anyway, he retired, came back. Then he was a master sergeant, I guess, got promoted to sergeant major, command sergeant major. So there's criteria to become a sergeant major. You have to attend the Sergeant Major's Academy.
Yep.
So he never did that. So therefore, when he dropped his paperwork a month after getting promoted, he didn't fulfill his obligation to go to the school. He didn't. Usually with a promotion like that, there's a timeline that's required. Like you got to do another 2 years in order for us to promote you into this position, because, you know, otherwise what's the point of promoting somebody and a month later having to promote somebody else?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so basically he claims he retired as a sergeant major or command sergeant major. But in reality, his paperwork shows that he's a master sergeant because he didn't fulfill the criteria to retire as a sergeant major.
Right.
So he earned sergeant major or was promoted to sergeant major, but he didn't fulfill everything. So his pension and his retirement is all as a master sergeant. So
right.
I just think that, you know, I got all this information out of an article from the Blaze Media, which is Glenn Beck's company. I think we as conservatives focus on the wrong stuff. We want to, like, there's a big deal now with Harris and Walz, and you know, Trump. Don't get me wrong, I love Donald Trump. He did great things for this country. His policies were fantastic for us when he was in office for 4 years. All you got to do is compare to 4 years ago to now and look at your expenses, and you can tell the difference. Not to mention the whole war stuff, but that's for another day. But I think that we want to attack the person. Stick to policy. The conservative policies benefit the country more than the liberal policies. And if you get that point across, I think you win elections. I hope.
Oh, I agree. I mean, yeah, the stolen valor thing, I guess military guys care about that, whatever. But at the end of the day, this guy is putting tampons in boys' bathrooms. You know, he let his entire city burn down. He's putting the Somaliland flag in his office. Like, there's other things we should be worrying about that are more directed towards furthering the betterment of our country than some guy who had some mediocre milquetoast career in the Army, which is like 80% of us anyway. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because I'll tell you, I wasn't the greatest soldier when I was lower enlisted.
Yeah.
I was young, I was irresponsible, and I drank too much, which is probably 90% of those people.
That's 90% of the Army right there.
Yeah. So it took me a long time to earn sergeant, but by the time I got to that rank, I was ready to accept the responsibility of it. I mean, you've served with me, you've seen me in action, so it's not like I was an irresponsible jackass as a sergeant first class. But that's where I was peaked at, man. I mean, the Guard is different promotion system than active duty.
Yeah, it's way slower.
It's all slot based, so there has to be a position open for you to jump into.
I mean, hell, I was an E4 for 9.5 years, literally.
Yeah.
Like the entire time of my Guard, just because there was no slots available in 519 Special Forces Group. Like I didn't get promoted to Sergeant E5, even though I was eligible in 2015 until I literally had to go to the reserve. So,
So, I mean, E7 was, as a lower enlisted, when you first enlist, E7 is your platoon sergeant. That's the big dog, man. I mean, you look at the first sergeant, but that's like, if you're looking at career goals, to me, first sergeant, sergeant major are almost unattainable for most people. So E7 was my career goal, and I made it. And I earned every minute of it. So, I don't know what he did in his National Guard career. I know back in the day, the National Guard was screwing off all the time. And, up until 9/11, the National Guard really didn't take it as seriously as they probably should have.
Yeah, and now they're our main supplementary force overseas. That's what the Guard and Reserve do. Like, I mean, they are supplementing more than active duty is, because they want to get those guys in on those training rotations. And we have a lot of great civilian experience in the Guard Reserve side that active duty just simply doesn't have. And, active duty will focus on the transport, special operations, things like that. But they don't have enough guys to fill the radio slots, to supply the truck drivers, everything else. And that's what the Guard and the Reserve are great at.
Yep. So, I mean, most of his career was prior to 9/11. So I don't know if
they probably did a lot of fucking nothing.
They probably did a lot of, having beer on their having beer at parties in the armory and stuff like that, which
a lot of motor
really
pool grill days. Oh yeah,
for
sure.
So it was, and that was a big shock to me, believe it or not, coming from the active duty to the National Guard. Now, I was in good units, so I can't complain, but the professionalism and the, all that kind of stuff in active duty is huge. And it's a little more lax in the National Guard. Guys are going by first names, and, one guy's a leader and one guy's a subordinate, and they're calling each other by first name. It happens, but as long as you respect their authority, I don't see too much wrong with it, but you have to have that discipline. And that's a big thing for me as a person, and it comes from my years of military experience. Respect, discipline, that kind of stuff. That's like the world to me.
Yeah. So I mean, and to finish off with that, I mean, you served a great military career. You went overseas. You went through multiple different conflicts. Went through all these things through 20 years of military development, pretty much. And then you worked on the civilian side, and now you're retired and worrying about what's going to be making our country better in terms of public policy. What are some motivating things you can tell all the young Guard, Reserve, active duty guys out there, and anyone else listening, that you can attribute to your life experience?
The biggest thing is probably leadership and diversability. Is that a word?
Now it is. Just like
being diverse.
Just like
being diverse.
Yes.
Yeah, you got to be diverse, and you got to. It's like you improvise, adapt, and overcome. You hear that in the Army all the time. So life's never going to go to plan. Never. So you got to always have those secondary and tertiary plans in place, that you got to think about stuff, and you got to be objective, and you got to be analytical about it. It can't always be on a feeling thing. And And the other thing is, if I'm talking to soldiers, it's hard for me. I've been out so long, dude. It's kind of hard to get back into the mindset. But
yeah,
I loved my time in the military. I loved leading soldiers. And the thing is that you always, as a leader, you have to put yourself last. And like even today, when we have Thanksgiving dinner or something, I go last. because I don't eat before my troops,
Right.
and I don't eat before my family. So it just becomes you. It's what you become, and it's hard for me to, without my active duty experience, it's really hard for me to figure out how a reservist does it. Because you have a whole nother life outside the military.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
a whole different thing. I was immersed in the military for my first 11 and a half years, you know, and then I ended up with almost 27 total years and 24 active duty. So, you know, that's over half my life right now, barely, but it's over half my life I was in the military. So, but it's just, you got to be self-disciplined. You got to, I think that's the biggest thing. You got to be self-disciplined. You know, when I first got out and I got my first job, military, if you're not 10 minutes early, you're late, right?
Right.
Civilians don't think that way. Like, if
Nope,
you're
they
on
definitely do
time,
not.
you're on time. So it's a whole change in mindset. And unfortunately, I've gone through that change. So it's, like I said, it's kind of hard to get back to that. But the biggest thing is take care of your brother and your sister, and you know, strive to be the best you can be. I guess I'm using army mottos for that. Be all you can be. But you know, you just push through it. And I encourage people to stay the 20 years. Do the 20 years, get the pension. It's well worth it. I don't know if they still do pensions, honestly. So I might be
yeah, they changed it to like the blended retirement system now, but that's what I'm staying in. I'm going to finish up my 20 years, even if it's on the guard reserve side. You know, it's still a percentage, you know, but at this point I got about 14 in. So I got like another 6 to 8, depending on guard time and continued deployments. But I think those are great words of advice. And I really appreciate you coming on the show today and telling everybody these things and talking about your experiences. And I hope people can learn from them.
Me too. And the healthcare. The healthcare is a big deal too.
Healthcare's big too.
Retirement.
Yeah,
because
no, sure.
I pay $50-some a month for full coverage healthcare.
Yep.
How many other people can say that?
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the show today, Chris. I really appreciate your time. That was a great conversation. And once again, thanks for everything you did for me, because, you know, it's about leaders caring about their troops, and you changed my life completely. And I just want to thank you again for everything that you did.
My pleasure, man. I mean, that's what I was there for. I mean, I was a recruiter, so it was my job to put people in the military, but I tried to get everybody in like they were already my soldier. So I'm glad I could help you out. And I think you've done great things since. And congratulations on making sergeant. And I'm sure you'll go.
One day I'll get my commission back. That's the goal, is just to be an asshole, just to get my commission back. So we'll see.
Hey, my buddy made E8 and then he went to OCS and now he's a light colonel.
There we go. That's the dream. Well, thanks again, Chris. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, man. It was great talking to you. And I'm more than willing to come back again if you ever want to talk to me.
Yep. No, absolutely. After I get back from Peru in September or October, I should say, we'll definitely, we'll schedule time for you to come back on.
All right. Take care, man. Good seeing you.
Bye.
Bye.